All right, today we are going to talk about the 10 reasons why ShadowDark RPG is great for solo play. And I will give a spoiler alert at the outset. The presence or the existence of the Solo Dark supplement, which is specific solo rules for ShadowDark, are only reasons 9 and 10. 8 of the reasons why I think ShadowDark itself is great for solo play have to do with what's in this book. So we are going to put aside the Solo Dark supplement for the moment, and we will focus initially talking about ShadowDark RPG itself, what's in this book, and actually I misspoke because one of my reasons has to do with some other material that's not in this book. But overall, ShadowDark RPG, and we will look here at the credits. It is the writing, design, and layout by Kelsey Dion, who was kind enough to send me this physical copy of the book and the solo supplement. ShadowDark, in and of itself, even without the supplement, is a wonderful resource for solo players, and we're going to get into talking about why in this video. I think the first reason, and well, I shouldn't say first, the first on my list, but this is not a top 10 in that regard. They're all equally important reasons why this is so good. The first one I'm going to talk about can be found in a little summary here, the random encounters area to roll 1d6, and if you get a 1, it's a random encounter. If you are in an unsafe situation, you're going to be checking every 3 rounds, risky every 2 rounds, and deadly, you're going to check every round. This summary, in and of itself, which is explained inside the book, is one of the reasons why I think ShadowDark is so great for soloists. The fact that the game exists in rounds, the fact that you are given many procedures for the game, really helps make the experience what I've referred to in my own work as like gamified, meaning it follows some type of expectations of board game play where you have turns and rounds and you have rules and procedures for doing various things. Bringing some type of order and expectation to an RPG when it's baked into the rule set can really help with solo play, because one of the tricks of solo play is having enough boundaries in place within the free-form nature of what you're doing to help move the story forward. And in this particular case, the example of how to check for random encounters, when to check for random encounters, is that. The idea, the concept of rounds in this game, which is modified slightly by the solo rules, but the concept of rounds themselves is one that is also useful for the soloists. And this is discussed here, that a turn is a player's moment to describe what they are doing, and a round completes when each person has taken one turn. Time passing in the game itself is described as in real time, so that an hour of time in real time is an hour of time in the game, and this follows the light source measurement, which is the way for tracking light, because light sources are going to last for 1 hour. This is just in the base rules, again, slightly modified for solo, which we'll get to. But the point here is not to get too much into the details of the mechanics. It's to explain that the game has baked into it the concept of turn order, a player turn and a GM turn. And as a soloist, those expectations and those rules do really help move your gameplay forward, because it gives you something to fall back upon when you are struggling to know what to do next. And knowing what to do next and the expectation of what is going to happen next is key to an exciting solo session, because you have to provide the basis for that. The GM's not going to do that. When I play solo, I've added in my own little house rule here, which is to roll 2d6 for the concept of whether or not a random encounter happens. My second d6 is the light source d6. If I roll a 1 on that, then I'm going to go to the light mishap table and roll there. So what that allows me to do is to have a built-in mechanism for rolling a random encounter that may be an enemy encounter, as well as some type of random light mishap counter. Because the pressure, the external pressure that the rule mechanics provide with needing to keep a light source on or fearing the loss of a light source, again, is also something that will provide a structure for moving the gameplay forward that is external to you. So it is allowing the rules themselves to act as a GM might, so that you have something to respond to as the player. The second reason why I think this game is so great for solo play is that the monsters also offer this type of external structure. So for example, we're looking here at the Devil's Entry of the Bestiary. There are many, many entries in the Bestiary, and they all have a brief description, a narrative, something visual to help you envision what they are. And many, not all of them, but many of them also have indications of attacks and things that they will do with the built-in DC check to avoid that. What this allows the soloist to do, if you want, is to completely bypass any type of combat encounter that is going to involve these stats and just go to responding to or attempting to respond to and evade an attack. And you have the built-in DC. You don't have to make any other decisions about it. If you are encountering, for example, this archdevil, you can simply have that encounter. It's a conflict encounter. It's not necessarily going through all the rounds of combat, by trying to evade soul binding, and then if you can't evade it, taking the penalty or what happens there from that. The reason why I think this is useful is, first of all, it gives you that option. You don't have to do it. It gives you the option. And secondly, I know that there are some soloists who don't particularly enjoy running through combat rounds as solo. It's less exciting. There is a lot more work that needs to be done in terms of just not only die rolling, but kind of keeping up the surprise and the action. Having these types of things built in, and it's not just it's many of them. Having these types of things built in allows for that thematic encounter that can be truncated or shortened by just dealing with the one thing. So for example, this harpy here, a horrific winged woman with vulture-like lower bodies, they sing or keen a hypnotic song. You can just deal with the song here and do your check and either get impacted by it or not be impacted by it. Now, as mentioned, not everything has this option. So here's the hippogriff. If you encounter that, you would not have that option. What you could do for yourself is, if you wanted, it's, as I said, the bestiary is very lengthy. You could make yourself a table of the enemies that do have that option if you just wanted to play that way, and make yourself a random table of that. I will say that one of the things I would love to see ShadowDark do, if it's ever redone, is to provide a numbered randomized table for the enemies, because there isn't anything in here. So I spent a lot of time creating that for myself. It did allow me to eliminate some type of enemies that I wouldn't want to encounter. So you've got all kinds of things in here, standard fantasy, but you also have like dinosaurs, which, for example, I don't ever like to see in my game. So I went through and kind of curated out of here and then made it into a random table for myself. But it would be great to have some type of, here's the dinosaurs, for example. It would be great to have some type of curated list. But the fact that the enemies themselves offer an option for shortening the play and still kind of thematically encountering them is, I think, super useful for solo play. There is alignment in this game, and while the alignment itself isn't something I'm going to talk about, the way it is used with the character titling is something I'm going to talk about, because this provides an extremely narratively thematic shorthand for getting a grasp on your characters. So for example, if you have a lawful thief at level 1 or 2, you can think of them as their title is a footpad, as opposed to a thug if they were chaotic, and a robber if they were neutral. And just understanding, just these words give you a real sense of the difference in the way the characters might seem and be and act. And as a soloist, this is a great way of getting a handle on the relationships among the characters in your party and starting perhaps to get some backstory for them. So we can just look and see, you can sort of pause the video to see the differences in these titles and how they are so evocative of behavior as well as actions and narrative history of the person in the game. So like, what was the warrior before they got to this adventure, they got to your table? What was the knave? What was the squire? Those types of things, which have a kind of implied backstory, and of course one that you could develop as a backstory, will be very helpful in getting you going with a character that just doesn't sort of drop out of the void, but that allows you to tie it to something in their past. Going along with that, we have something here that I would recommend using when you create your party. Now this section is for the GM to make kind of, it's called rival crawlers or like NPCs or something in the game. But for you as the soloist, if you roll up a party name, let's say you're making 2 or 3 or 4 characters, if you roll up a party name and your party name is, the Iron Trackers, and they're known for taking monster trophies, that's going to give you a certain type of feeling behind your people, as opposed to if you were, say, the Emerald Guardians who were specializing in the undead. Giving some type of narrative flavor like that to the group that you are running at the outset helps to ground you already with something that feels, it's not generic. It's leading you in the direction of behavior. It's leading you in the direction of a type of story. You could also roll up these signature tactics for if your party was like all one type of party. And again, that is going to help in establishing some types of suggestions, or I think of it as like scaffolding a story for you that is based in the rules. And that is very important in getting off the ground, because one of the things that I hear a lot from people when they write to the channel, and what I've tried to address in the channel and various videos, is once you get beyond character creation, like, where do you go? And that is a difficult problem, and it's why I often advise, and I've done this advising in my book, I've done this advising in videos on the channel that you can find, to start with an environment first, because if you have an environment and then you put characters into it, you have a relationship there. If you just build a character, you often don't know what to do with that character. Yet, many people like to begin with character creation, understandably, because there are specific procedures and rules laid out for it. It's easier to get into. In this particular case, with this book, with this rule set, for these reasons that I just said, if you did begin with character creation and you focused on the titles and you focused on giving your party some type of name like that, you would be a little bit farther into developing a narrative and kind of having a sense of your party beyond what their stats were. Because ultimately, in solo play in particular, the success, I think, and the narrative drive to move forward is going to be coming out of not the stats per se, but the other things, the thematic things, the narrative things, the descriptive things. And what is offered here in these basic rules in the concept of the traits and the party name really helps with that. Additionally, you are given here some very simple tables to create overland hex maps. You could do this. You could place your party into a town to start with. You could give the town a point of interest. Maybe that point of interest would become the place for your adventure. Maybe it would just be something that would suggest more theme to you. And there are lots of little tables here for rolling up things within different districts of a town, and then lots of tables for giving flavor to it. You could generate a tavern. You could have some shops and things and names of shops. I had my characters start at the, I think it was the Fink and Hearth, and they were in a place where they could buy things, and that helped me begin my story. But all that said, if you want a proper adventure generator, there is an adventure generator here. And you have a couple of details that you can roll up on this D20 table. So it's going to be, you're going to defeat the spy under the Barrow Mounds, or you're going to escape the sword of the ancient lineage. Pretty classic adventure generator. And it also gives you an adventuring site name. Again, the presence of this is going to really anchor the story. So in my case, I had to go to the citadel of the shimmering borderlands, and I actually drew a map with that there, and it created the space for me to adventure to. That was the place I decided I was going to need to go to. Giving these environmental cues in the random tables anchors your place, anchors your story, anchors your adventures into something, and it makes it very easy then to travel in what feels like a sandbox way when you have certain anchor points. I've lost track of where I am, but the next point I want to say is that the basic mechanics are going to be with rolling against the difficulty class, and there are 4 of them laid out for you here with an explanation of what they are. It's very easy to remember these 4. It's very easy to have them kind of locked in to your understanding of the rules, adding your modifier, rolling your D20. The paring that down in that way is super helpful because it allows you to operate with just a general understanding of how something is going to be challenged. The fact that there are 4 of them, if you want to randomize a challenge, if you come upon something that is locked, whatever, and you don't know, is it easy, hard, normal, or extreme, you could roll a D4 and you could get an answer. If you didn't want to equalize, of course, the chance of it being extreme, you could create a D6, use a D6 or a D8 or whatever for these 4 options and adjust accordingly. So it gives you the flexibility within the rules to make the gameplay what you want, but still work within the pre-established rules, which again, gives you the anchor point to create flexibility. And I think ultimately for a rule set to be successful to use solo, it needs to give you enough procedures and anchors that allow you to work flexibly within it, because it's the combination of the two, the restrictive kind of rule set and the free-form narrative that you're going to create that help enliven solo play. Along those lines, my next point and reason why this is great for solo is there are explicit different modes of play. Different modes of play here. The one that I think is most useful for me for the solo play is this momentum mode. And it says you have advantage on checks if you're repeating an action you failed to try the exact same thing next turn. You can also modify that to be you have advantage on every check if you really want to kind of move through the game. But in this particular mode is helpful because one of the frustrating things about solo play is, you try to do something, you fail. Your other character tries, they fail. You're kind of stuck. You don't have another player there or GM there to say something new is happening. You have to decide if something new is happening, and then it starts to feel a little flat. So using this rule, I think, is super helpful, and it's something I actually am going to adapt for other rule sets. It's just a great way of kind of just getting you out of a little bit of trouble perhaps, or giving, increasing the chances of success so you can sort of move on, because a challenge is great until it's not, and having an obstacle is great until it just becomes a frustration. There are other modes here that may or may not work for you. For me, I didn't use them in my solo play, but you can make it more deadly. You can make it more fatal. You can make it more of a grind, to recover fewer health when you rest. But just again, the fact that the designer has thought about tweaking the game for just around the table with a GM, importing some of that to your solo play, thinking about the rules as not necessarily something that you can use or not use, but that you can bend to your whim, I think is particularly helpful. And then the last point I want to make is coming from outside of this book, that the designer has released a number of zines that have adventures and new classes and new random tables that you can import into your games or work through and play through yourself by randomizing the encounters, by relying on the maps that are created. And that type of support is also very useful. You may just pick up something from one of the zines that's a specific challenge within that adventure and just use it in whatever story you're developing. But because they all are individual anchored adventures with explicit narrative and with explicit plot developments, that can be helpful to you to either follow along on your own and modify for solo play, or to, as I said, pick out and put into your game. So, for example, there is a new character class that the hedge witch, that I really want to play because I love playing witches, and I didn't realize that until I had got my own party going. So I'm going to go back now and make one of those characters and have my party encounter that character and then bring her into my party. So to do all of this, well, there's also ShadowDark, and ShadowDark is the solo supplement for this game, also written, designed, and laid out by Kelsey. And I will say at the outset, I noticed, I did not know this before I saw it, that a bunch of content creators, including myself, are acknowledged as, examples or inspiration for this game. So I appreciate that shout out. I don't know Kelsey, and as I said, I wasn't aware of that until I opened this up. Be that as it may, welcome to ShadowDark, the solo gameplay rules. As a player, you are both the characters and the GM. This booklet gives you tables to do that. We've got an oracle and prompts. I mean, that's essentially what it is. And there are some modified rules here, and it will explain what those are. I mentioned earlier in the video that the light source rule was a little bit different. In traditional play, the light lasts for 1 hour of real time. In solo play, it's meant to last for 10 rounds. So you could track that however you felt best, but having the tracking of the light amounts to like an external pressure on the gameplay and external pressure to do something or to manage your torches, and all of that is very helpful. What's great also in this book is not only the reference to ShadowDark itself, but a very generous reference to other systems and other games that could work with this. So I don't have the Monster OWAL, but I have Index Card RPG and Knave, and it gives you even the page numbers to get monsters. If you want to get monsters out of Knave or ICRPG, here are the page numbers. This is true for NPCs, treasures, encounters, dungeons, and wilderness. Very, very helpful. And a lot of these things, the dungeon in particular, the Tome of Adventure Design is exceedingly useful for solo play. And in fact, my own video, my most popular video, Easy Ways to Be Your Own GM, actually began as a review of the first edition of the Tome of Adventure Design. That's how central I think it is to the solo experience. Then we get some narrative information here, dungeon names, Very useful. Again, I talked about this because some of this is also like there are tables here available, like the party name, to help create a narrative. So if you know you are in the tomb of the blighted sorcerer, for example, as opposed to the abbey of the disgraced lord, it's very different. You allow yourself to think, well, what does that actually mean? And that can inform all the types of things that you do. And if you are using some of these other resources, for example, to build out the details of that, the Tome of Adventure Design will allow you, rolling on totally different tables, to build out the type of dungeon that's the first thing I described versus the type of dungeon that's the second thing I described. And will also suggest the types of encounters to have, and maybe even the type of mission you need or you want that makes sense with the place you are in. There's a discussion here of oracles. What is that? Essentially, it is a yes, no, and there are some best practices here, which are quite useful, that you can, it works best when it is used, I would say, sparingly. And I've talked about this in many of my videos as well, that if you find yourself asking too many questions in a row, that is a sign that you shouldn't be asking any questions at all. You should just let the narrative decide. And an oracle is best when it is used sparingly. Here, essentially the same thing, saying deferring to the game rules. See if the game rules can solve your question, like making a certain type of check, for example, than just asking the question. And the phrasing of this, and here there's a limit, ask no more than 3 questions per situation. I certainly would agree with that. Maybe even more extreme, like 2 is more extreme. It's more of a narrative challenge for you. So you are going to determine the odds of something, and based on those odds, you're either going to roll with advantage, disadvantage, or just regular. And it's a basic D20 table, yes, a twist, or no. And it will explain how to also interpret the odd numbers. You can get like a yes, but, for example. And then finally, as all good solo supplements do, it ends with a prompt table. We've got our verbs and our nouns here in a D100 table, and you can use this at any point in the game. And my recommendation, honestly, before going to an oracle even, is to roll on a prompt, because a prompt, by its definition, is going to be a narrative suggestion for you, as opposed to just trying to get a yes, no, which on some level doesn't really get you anywhere. And in fact, in my book, I have a whole chapter on like yes, no, dead ends, because I think that people can rely too much on what an oracle might give. An oracle being the suggestion of something telling you the future, when really, like a prompt table, it's more like an oracle, because you're using something to interpret the future. So if you roll on, disagree truth, for example, you are looking at something and trying to figure out what it is, rather than asking like, is this a weapon I can use? Yes, no. Roll on disagree truth. What is this thing? Disagree truth. Whatever story you have, you may be able to use that to then get your answer about that weapon, as to whether or not you should pick it up, whether or not it's harmful, whether or not it will help you. So my sort of side piece of advice is, even before going to an oracle, seeing whether, as Kelsey says here, defer to the game rules. Is there something in the game, a check that you could do that may help, because that will move things along. Then maybe thinking, what if I roll a prompt? What if I roll a prompt instead of asking a question? Does that help? Well, if you're still in need, then go to the oracle for the yes or the no. So that is what is contained in ShadowDark, a great supplement to a great rule set, ShadowDark. And overall, I think this is a wonderful way to support solo play, and it is thematic to classic fantasy. Obviously, There are many videos out there that kind of go over the rules and explain the origins of this system, which I intentionally did not do here because the focus was on explaining my reasons for why ShadowDark, even without the solo supplement, but the solo supplement is great, is wonderful for solo play.